Hey everybody, I have here in my hand two different plants. One is this nice looking flower that I picked from back here in our side garden area that's just starting to come up. And this other one I picked from the front of our house where we have a lot of this type of thing growing. Dandelion, it's crazy that we already have dandelions growing. But it's interesting that both of these are plants, yet we characterize one as something beautiful and we want to display in our houses, and the other one we characterize as a weed. It's a nuisance, it's something we get rid of. We all have relationships. We've discussed this a few different times about how relationships are important in our life. But some of those relationships we often characterize as a nuisance, and some of those relationships we characterize as being life-giving. One is unwanted, one is wanted in our life. We might characterize our relationships as a nuisance like we characterize some plant life as a nuisance, such as a dandelion. Think of some of the relationships currently in your life. One of those relationships is your parents. And for you might characterize them as not as something that's life-giving, but maybe they're oppressive. You characterize them as being oppressive. They keep you from doing things you maybe want to do. Or you have a sibling, but they're not just a sibling, they're more like a pest. That's more like how you characterize them. Or you have teachers, and you view your teacher maybe as just this demanding figure in your life. Or you have a coach, and that's just somebody who is a critical person in your life. Or poor people, they're not just without things in their life. They're, maybe you characterize them as being a lazy person. Or a rich person, they're not just people who have things. We maybe actually characterize them more as someone who's a stuck-up person. I remember back when I was in college, there was a professor who had a class that I took, and I hated going to this class. Every time I went to it, I would complain about being there and just not wanting to go through it, and just did not appreciate what was being offered. And I had a friend in the class who often said kind of the same things. Yet I have learned on this side of getting older that I've actually leaned on a lot of good information that I gained from that class, and it's actually been helpful in a lot of different ways, more than I thought it would be. But that friend that I had at that time wasn't helping me to see the professor as something that was life-giving in my life. Rather, I saw the professor as someone who was demanding something from me and was more an oppressive figure at that time. At that time, I needed friends who were more wise, who could show me that that professor was not a demanding figure, but someone who was trying to invest in my life. And that's really what I should have had around me as friends at that time to help me see that. You see, our friends shape our relationships and the way that we characterize people. Proverbs 13:20 tells us that anyone who walks with wise people grows wise, but a companion of foolish people suffers harm. 1 Corinthians 1:30 also describes Jesus as God's wisdom for us. So what this means is that the life of Jesus shows us the wisest way to live. If we have friends who are connected to Jesus, they shape us to wisely view other people as whole people. Whereas if we have relationships with foolish people, they shape us to view people more as labels rather than as whole people. I mentioned in the last session that in the Bible letter of Philemon, Philemon was a slave owner. But his friend Paul followed Jesus, and Jesus changed the way that Paul viewed his relationship with other people. In the letter, we encounter this person named Onesimus, who was a slave of Philemon. And Onesimus encountered Paul. He also began to follow Jesus, and he eventually returned to Philemon with this letter that Paul wrote. And in this letter, we see that Paul challenged Philemon. And we see that Paul challenged Philemon to adopt a new relationship with Onesimus. Onesimus was no longer just a runaway slave or a nuisance in Philemon's life. Rather, now Onesimus was now a brother in Christ to Philemon. Onesimus is returning not as a nuisance, but as a life-giving relative, someone adding a dynamic of God's life to Philemon's life. Here we encounter Paul wisely helping to shape how Philemon related to others, specifically with the slave that he had named Onesimus. Because wise friends shape wise relationships. Wise friends shape wise relationships. What kind of friends are shaping how you relate to others? Are they foolish friends? Are they friends who are disconnected from Jesus? Or are they wise, Christ-like friends, helping you to view others in the holistic way that God does, that we see in the life of Jesus? Contemplate that as you go on without your day, that wise friends shape wise relationships. I'll see you next time.